Antagonistic Pleiotropy. You may have heard of it before, from the vegan crowd, as a way of casting aspersions at the carnivore diet. What exactly is antagonistic pleiotropy in the first place, though? Quite a sophisticated name. Well, I'm here to explain it. Not only am I here to explain it, I'm actually here to explain why it's absolutely nonsensical, gibberish, and a desperate attempt to once again cast aspersions and chastise the carnivore diet for no good reason other than, well, insecurity. Antagonistic pleiotropy is a real thing. It's the phenomenon by which a gene evolves over the course of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years perhaps, and grants benefits to the overall environment, that being the person in which the gene is present, in the short term, or in the immediate initial phases of life. But it has a drawback, a trade-off, that is therefore the expense, which is a shorter lifespan, maybe the development of heart disease, etc., etc. There is an example of this, and that is, well, sickle cell anemia. You may have heard of that condition before, where you have physically sharp red blood cells. You have extreme anemia in some of these people, and also these people develop very bad lesions in their arteries. And not only do they develop them in their arteries, it's all throughout their vascular system in parts where we often do not see heart disease develop. But the way in which they actually found out and asserted with confidence that this was an example, the genes responsible were examples of antagonistic pleiotropy, were very high in quantity and variety. They performed epidemiological studies on these populations to see, hence the name epidemiology, whether there was actually an epidemic occurring at the time that the genes could have been having an exerted pressure by in order to develop that gene in the genome. And in fact, what they found was that malaria was the common denominator on all of these studies. They performed other analyses to see if the gene themselves in other insects, for example, actually did show benefit in withstanding malaria infection, and etc., etc. It was a very lengthy process, and we asserted, after all of these studies were done, that in fact the genes concerned were subject and classified, rightfully so, as the consequences of antagonistic pleiotropy. Fair enough. The problem with this antagonistic pleiotropy argument towards the carnivore diet, or towards meat eating, or, egg eating, or anything else like that, though, is the fact that, first of all, I have not heard one citation, not one reference even, to a gene that is purported to be subject to this phenomenon whatsoever. So that's a problem in and of itself, because the entire genome can't be subject to antagonistic pleiotropy. There has to be certain genes that are subject to antagonistic pleiotropy, or at least one. Now, just because I haven't heard one cited or referenced does not mean that there aren't or haven't been any genes that have been referenced or cited. The problem is that there is not enough science to actually support this claim. The argument is that, well, meat eating may have positive effects on the body in terms of, I don't know, increased muscle mass because of bioavailable protein, or it might make people look younger, or it might heal a lot of these chronic conditions, but at the expense of what? You'll develop heart disease. You'll develop a shorter lifespan, or, well, in other words, live a lot shorter of a lifespan. The problem with these arguments, though, besides the fact that there haven't been any genes that are actually referenced, at least once again that I've heard of, is the fact that, well, all of the data that is purported to suggest and prove unequivocally, unambiguously, that the carnivore diet, whatever the hell that is, shortens your lifespan, causes heart disease, are all piss poor. Low R values, which basically equates to a low, very weak association. Of course, that corresponds to low R squared values as well. The explanatory coefficient. Each variable, X and Y, have very, very poor signal-to-noise ratios, with the noise being, in many cases, equivalent to or greater than the signal. The sample sizes are incredibly small. These people are not genotypically and or phenotypically identical. They're done on very aged populations, oftentimes to ensure the occurrence of deaths. They don't report the absolute outcomes, because many times the absolute outcomes of such analyses are extremely low, lower than anything significant whatsoever, etc., etc. There have been no studies conducted. What this really is a desperate, ironic attempt to once again cast aspersions at the carnivore diet. But once again, I said in the beginning, I alluded to in the beginning, that this is a desperate attempt to cast aspersions. In fact, they contradict themselves whenever they say things like this as well, implicitly. Why do I say that? Because oftentimes the vegan crowd, to be more explicit, the crowd that actually cites this argument more than any other, is the same crowd that, on one hand, will say that carnivores look absolutely horrendous. They look extremely unhealthy. They look haggard, pallid, while simultaneously citing this argument against the carnivore diet, saying, oh, well, you might look great in the beginning. You might heal a lot from all of these chronic health conditions. You might completely ameliorate them. You might be stronger and have more mental clarity than ever before. All of the things that they say carnivores do not actually experience. And if they do, they're cheating, of course. It's ironic. It's contradictory. contradictory once again, and it just goes to show how desperate people become whenever they see that their ideology or theology, whatever it may be, is threatened in any way, shape, or form by any other ideology. What it goes to show is that in their moral hierarchy, at the very top of that moral hierarchy, is not the well-being of animals. It's the preservation and maintenance of their ideology over anyone else's. So, with that being said, you can rest easy on the idea that eating your meat and eggs, or your breakfast of bacon and eggs, will kill you. At the very, very least, there is no evidence that that is the case. Your genome is fine. So, I'll see you in the next one.